Let's get the run sheet. There we go.
Hello and welcome to another edition of the Tigers Down Under. I'm your host, Alex, and with me I have Logan. How are you, Logan?
Hey, Alex. Yeah, doing really well.
Yeah, look, it's been a bit of an interesting week, I guess, to be a City supporter. An unwanted 100-year record broken, no goals in 6 games. I suppose a positive result in some ways against Swansea, and then positives to take out of the Blackburn game as well in terms of a bit more attacking capabilities. But yeah, I guess it's sort of an interesting period that we find ourselves in, I guess, at the moment. Starting with the Swansea game, how have you found it?
It's in some ways it's sadly kind of as expected. I think when we make these throwaway comments at the start of the season, like we're going to have to bide our time, we're going to have to ride the wave. You know, we're probably not as good. All of those kind of things in theory, you go, oh, that's okay, but then as a fan, when you find yourself on the on the roller coaster week to week, and the fixtures start going by, and you can't really see yourself making any headway in the league table, it does start to be somewhat of a concern. Look, the point at Swansea was a well-earned point. I think that, make no mistake about it, any team that has as much possession and as many shots as Swansea had, and for us to go away with our point was, an incredible testament to the way we defended and how organised we were, and perhaps their lack of finishing. But in a game like that, if you saw the statistics of how the actual game unfolded, and you knew that you could take a point away from that, you'd snap their hand off. So I wasn't too deflated by that. I think that result, whilst it didn't do a whole lot to encourage me, it didn't do much to deflate me either. It's the kind of fixture that we hope to see on the road to be able to actually start to turn this season into something. We need to be taking points, and that was a really good effort. So yeah, not a great performance in the sense that it did too much for us, but I think that there's a lot that can be learned from a game like that. And Swansea are a tough side.
Yeah, certainly. I think at the start of the season, when I was looking ahead to this fixture, I was optimistic that they might not have settled in at this stage under the new manager, but they certainly used that international break quite well. I think they came out and played with that sort of style of play that we expected to see from them. As you say, quite possession heavy, took a lot of shots. I thought Ingram was phenomenal, and I'll probably be giving away who my man of the match was a bit later on. But Ingram, I thought, was phenomenal, made a few really important saves for us, kept us in that game quite well, and was clearly sort of, and across both of these games really has seemed to be just about our most important player, which has been great to see for him after a couple of mistakes or incidents earlier in the season that might have had a few people doubting his ability. I guess positive for me, I guess, was seeing Wilkes come back in, starting the game, getting the minutes in the legs, and hopefully he'll be better for it over the next couple of games that we have. Although I guess seeing Moncur come back in, but he offered a little bit, but wasn't as creative as I was sort of hoping that he might have been going forward. I think we're still really missing Honeyman, and it's great to see the news that he's fully fit and available for the Sheffield United game. And I'm sort of still holding out hope that when we get Honeyman back into the side and we start to see our real strongest 11, we can start to make some inroads in the league and get some results on the board. Because, as you say, it is early days. Being outside the relegation zone on just goal difference is a little bit of a concern. I'd sort of perhaps optimistically hoped that we wouldn't directly be involved in a relegation battle this season. But look, maybe that's where we'll find ourselves. And I did see the point made on Twitter that you just have to look at the league table and the fact that 2 of the 3 sides beneath us are the other promoted clubs in Blackpool and Peterborough. So it's not as if Peterborough or Blackpool are flying and we're really struggling. And in some ways that would then reflect more poorly on us. it just is evidence itself of the fact that there is that big gap between League One and the Championship in terms of going up. And we sort of drew the comparisons pre-season. It is like going up to the Premier League and being a small club and having to adapt to that bigger league. And I guess Preston was maybe a bit of a false dawn in that sense, that we thought maybe we were going to adapt much quicker than we'd hoped. But getting a couple of points on the board against Bournemouth and now Swansea, I think is probably a positive.
Yeah, exactly right. I think all those points that you raised are really valid, and particularly the newly promoted teams are finding life difficult in the Championship, which we have talked about before. I think even if you look at the teams that we have played, there's been a fair mix. We've definitely played some of the higher end teams, in the sense that we've seen Fulham, we've played Bournemouth. It's not as if we've kind of been losing to the teams, in and around us. It's not like we've had a tough loss to Blackpool or Peterborough, because we just haven't met them. I mean, the Derby result was incredibly disappointing, just because of who they have on paper and the way that game kind of panned out. And I mean, you already touched on the Ingram mistake. That earlier in the season maybe had people doubting him. We've seen how he's replied. So it's definitely not time for doom and gloom just yet, but as I think I was very similar to you, in the sense that I was optimistic that we wouldn't find ourselves this far down the league ladder so quickly. But with that in mind, as you mentioned, we still haven't seen Honeyman yet. We have to remember that even though Wilkes is back, he's been injured, and we haven't really seen him hit the ground running. Tom Huddleston is another one. He said at the start, he said, I'll be fine, but just give me some games to get my legs, and then we'll start to see what I've still got left in the tank. So look, there's a lot to still kind of look forward to, and we've got some far more important fixtures coming up once we get through this little run of tough games. And they'll be the games that kind of make the season. But I mean, look, flip the switch a little bit. Let's remember the season that we got relegated from the Championship, where we sat at Christmas time, and what happened. There's a long way to go just yet, and it's just as likely that things could turn around and we could get some momentum and string a few back-to-back wins, and all of a sudden find yourself back in that mid-table security. So, look. Lots to be excited about still, but if this goes on for much longer and we find ourselves still languishing at the bottom around Christmas, then we'll start to have a bit more of a harder conversation.
Yeah, you mentioned the relegation season there, and there might be a few red flags. We can talk about in a little bit about the way we're playing at the moment. But look, it's probably a tough game to pick 3 votes from, similar to the Bournemouth game last time around. It was a bit difficult to pick out 3 players from a performance like that. But I will give you the unenviable task of going first on this one and trying to pick out your 3-2-1 for this one.
Look, you're not going to like this, but I'm giving all 6 points to Ingram. It's not because I don't think that as a team that we didn't defend well. I can't split anybody else on the field that kind of made a claim for a point or 2 points more than the other. I think everyone defended equally, and Ingram was exceptional. So I'm sorry if that throws the numbers out, but it's the only resolution I can offer.
No, not at all. I like that. It's a new precedent, but I'll accept it, and I'll probably follow suit. I think look, as I said before, I think Ingram with his terrific saves really kept us in the game, and in a game where so little going forward, it's hard to pick out any other votes for players in that sense either. I think, look, if you really wanted to make a case, I think Bernard had another fantastic display at centre back. I think he's one that, almost a little bit like Emmanuel last season, he's having such a terrific display at the moment. It's hard to make a case for dropping him for Alfie Jones to come back into the side. But then you're sort of left in the situation now where previously we might have said, oh, well, that's okay, we can put Jones into the midfield. But we've got such an overabundance of central midfielders now that it's hard to make a case for where Jones ends up. In another life, in another season before our 4-3-3 philosophy took hold, I would have made a case for shifting the formation to 3 at the back, and I still would make that case. But I'm not naive enough to think that all of a sudden we're going to come out with a dynamic, flexible new formation that might actually suit the players, heaven forbid. So, look, I think Bernard was another one that I'd potentially have given a vote to in that case as well. And yeah, I mean, looking at the other players, I just can't make a case for anyone else. I mean, yeah, if you are going to give the 3 votes to players, it probably would just be Ingram, Bernard, and then maybe Greaves as the sort of 3 defensive players who did quite well. But outside of that, not
even a long shot. I might have even gone rogue and given a point to Longman just because he nearly stole the
shot
game.
On target. Yeah, the one and only shot on target. That's a good shout as well.
And I think if we had if that shot miraculously had found its way to the net, I think it would have been an absolute robbery. Probably the cheekiest 3 points in City history. I would almost say.
Yeah, no, for sure. And even look, the draw itself, it's not quite the heroics of Boas Myhill against Spurs back in 2008. I think it was 2009. I think it was when he pulled out that masterclass of 15 saves or whatever it was to keep them out. But I think Ingram, from the free kick especially, I think was the main one that I'm thinking of. But there was a couple of others as well where he put in a terrific display. Yeah, well, look, we'll move on to that Blackburn game now. It's a 2-0 loss. Really, in a way, like before the match, I'd sort of made the point that the lack of goals being scored was a concern for me, but a 0-0 here would be acceptable if we put in an attacking display and we just got unlucky with our shots. And I think that was largely the case here. I think in the first half, we were certainly the team on top. And it was really just about a 10, 15-minute patch when they made their substitutions and got on top and scored 2 quick goals to sort of kill off the game. But before that point, I thought we were looking quite in the contest. Smallwood and Smith came in for Huddleston and Moncur, which in some ways made us a much more defensive outfit, but in a lot of other ways, it sort of unlocked Doherty to get forward a bit more. I thought we were a bit more fluid in attack as well, and you could see the players were had quite an appetite to get forward and create a lot of chances as well. So in some ways, ironically, this was a bit more of a positive display, even though we walked away with no points.
Yeah. And one of the things that it really highlighted to me, I agree with every single sentiment that you just made in that kind of intro. But one of the things about League One was the amount of volume in chances that we're actually seeing week in, week out. It really allowed, your Magenises and your Wilkses and particularly your KLPs to kind of show their highlight reels because they were just given so much volume. I think that's one of the things that KLP is really struggling with at the moment is the fact that there just doesn't seem that flurry of chances to come. And he does need to spend a lot more time, sitting back defending. And then when he does kind of get unleashed or put away in the corner and like unlocked, so to speak, it's very few and far between that those kind of chances arrive. And so I think that's what they're kind of, when we talk about him learning his trade, and you got to remember Wilkes is still incredibly young as well. I think that's kind of what stood out for me in this game is, as you mentioned, we were definitely the better side, I believe, in the first 45 minutes. But so much of what is happening with City's attack at the moment is we need to spend more time being disciplined in defense. We need to hold our shape. And so the opportunities just don't seem to come as often. And I think that's a very different style of play for a lot of these guys, what they've experienced over the last 12 months.
Yeah, that's right. And I think McCann after the match made a comment around the fact that he hadn't seen so many shots sort of skied over the bar in previous seasons. And I do think there's a huge element of, as you're saying, not having as many chances. And therefore, when they come, players are sort of rushing or getting overly excited by the opportunities and aren't making the right decision all the time. So it is tough in that sense. And the players are adapting, but it's a very young squad, very inexperienced at this level. So certainly still a lot to learn for them. 55% of the possession in this game compared to, I think, 39 or 38% against Swansea, 20 shots for the match, 4 on target, much more creative, much more at it than we had seen previously. I did have to laugh a little bit. The Blackburn first goal scored by Daniel Ayala, former, we've been doing those sort of flashback episodes recently, looking back on that early 2010s sort of period. And of course, Daniel Ayala had a great loan spell with us at that point from Liverpool, quite a while ago for him now. So, he was quite entitled to celebrate the goal as much as he did. But funny to see his name pop up because he's probably a bit of a forgotten player at this point.
Yeah, and perhaps even more sadly for us, it came off a set piece as well, which is,
Yeah.
something that is kind of been mentioned, as an area of concern. So typical to have a former City player scoring off a set piece just to kind of rub a little bit more salt into the wounds.
Yeah, and I saw an interesting comparison or comment made about this game as well as the Derby game being the fact that they were midweek games, night games, and the fact that even last season we really struggled in those midweek fixtures as well. I think it was just the Portsmouth game. I think was the only one that we really looked or had a standout performance in. I'm not sure what the implications of that are, if it's a trend, if it's just a coincidence, anything like that, but. It is certainly one to keep an eye on in terms of following fixtures and to see what happens there. And then, sort of as I mentioned off the top of the program, 100 years since the last time we failed to score in 6 games in a row. Is that a massive concern? Is it just a stat, and stats don't mean a whole lot for you, or is it the fact that we haven't scored since the opening day a bit worrying?
Oh, it's definitely worrying. I think it would be lying if we sat here and said that we're content that we haven't been scoring. I mean, the reason you go to watch football games is so you can celebrate your team scoring goals. It's not because you love going to watch shutout 0-0 draws.
Unless you're
Goals.
Steve Press, I'm sure he enjoys those.
That's right, and goals ultimately is what it's all about. And
Yeah.
I think one of the things that we have talked about at length is like you look at the League One season. We talked about how prolific Wilkes, Magennis, KLP were in that season, and the fact that they're not having anywhere near that same level of impact, in the Championship is definitely a cause for concern. I do think it comes back to the lack of volume that we are getting, and hopefully that as you mentioned, we have so many midfielders at the moment. Hopefully McCann does kind of settle on his best midfield shape and they start to click, and that will come over time, particularly as players get their full fitness, and I guess they become more familiar with the system, because there are a lot of new faces in the squad at the moment. But yeah, it is an area of concern. And I think that it's something that can be fixed rather quickly. You'd be amazed what one game, or particularly similar to the Preston game, if we had a blowout victory, where we ended up putting 2 or 3 past the keeper, I think you can fix that stuff really quickly. But it is a worry at this point in time for sure.
Okay, well, I'll give my 3 votes for this one first of all. So I'll go again with 3 votes for Ingram. I think even though we did concede the 2 goals, I think especially in the first half, he was looking quite solid in goal for us and has put in back-to-back man of the match performances from my point of view.
Yeah.
For the 2 votes, I'm going to give those to Tyler Smith. I think coming off the bench, he definitely looked the most lively option for us and showed why he should be sort of almost considered our default number 1 option at striker. I think Magennis, whilst looking promising in that first game against Preston, hasn't really struck a chord since then. A lot of criticism for him as well for his constant sort of living offside, I guess. Yeah, I think he's got the most offside calls made against him of any player this season, and in fact I think more than a number of clubs, which is saying quite a bit. So yeah, Tyler Smith I thought was fantastic, a lot of energy, and really offered a threat. And there'd be nothing better than seeing him slot one past his former side Sheffield United on the weekend. So I think he's certainly in line to start that game up top. And then I think I'll give the 1 vote to Callum Elder. I think he looked quite damaging on the left. I think he was offering quite a bit. He came out after the game against Swansea to sort of say that he wanted to learn the lessons from that and really put them into practice in that Blackburn game. And I think he looked quite promising for us on that left-hand side. I think honourable mention to Coyle as well. I think Coyle has certainly been one of our most consistent players this season, and he's probably sort of, because he's consistently a 7 or 8, he doesn't stand out as much as the players that might occasionally give a 9 or a 10. But he's certainly one that I'd give an honourable mention to.
Yeah, almost the same as you. I went 3 for Ingram as well. That kind of seemed to be the most logical one. I agree. I was very impressed with Tyler Smith, and I thought that he, gave us something. I think Moncur as well. He seemed to have flashes of somewhat brilliance. There was that kind of double chance that he had, where there was the shot that kind of, I think it was saved initially, and then he got the return cut back inside, and then it kind of hit it top right, and it just kind of was a little bit off target, but he seemed to look like a fairly promising as well. But I gave my 1 point to Louis Coyle as well. I thought he was outstanding in the first half, and yeah, as you mentioned, he's just he has just become so reliable for us, and two areas in the fullback ranks at City on both sides, and with Emmanuel as a backup as well. It is such an area of our strength, and it's really nice to be able to see the likes of Callum Elder and Louis Coyle performing consistently. So yeah, that's how I place it.
Certainly. Well, we'll move on then, and it is a topic that I know you've sort of said previously. It's a tough one to discuss without anything official happening. So we won't talk necessarily the chances or the probabilities of a takeover taking place. We did have the news break midweek that Akun Elikai had given an interview, I think, in Turkey, to basically say that he wanted to buy the club, that if everything went his way, he would be successful in buying the club. And it is what it is. And I guess we just sort of wait and see on that, what progress is made. But what I wanted to discuss, and what has been sort of a point of discussion on a lot of the social media platforms this week following that interview, were his comments around wanting to see a Turkish manager and backroom staff. And then, to quote him directly, was certain Turkish players in the side, which of course some people have taken and sort of imagined a Turkish 11, tearing out the squad from the roots and sort of replacing all the players, which I don't think is, well, speaking for him, but I don't think that's what he meant, especially when he uses that word certain. Taking, of course, as well into account the fact that with Brexit and everything else, that I think bringing in foreign players is a much tougher proposition now, so they'd have to be players of a certain quality. But I guess I wanted to get your thoughts on those comments, and in a broader sense, I guess, in terms of a potential new owner coming in, potential overhaul of the squad, potential investment in the squad. What are your sort of takeaways from those comments?
Yeah, so look, the place needs a facelift. I think that the kind of the Tigers faithful have been crying out for many years for the Allams to go, and I think there's still such a segregated group of fans who have decided that until the Allams leave, then they're not coming back, and I don't think that that's a healthy proposition for any club to be in. I think that even just the initial change of a brand new manager will bring everybody back to football at City, and I think that ultimately has to be the number one priority for the City, for the players as well, to be able to play in front of full stadiums again, and for just that to regain some of that kind of spring in the step. Now, the comments about the Turkish players coming in, if hypothetically assuming this all does go through, I think that you explained it really well. I like the wording where you said, like, how much we actually read into those comments. Is there some kind of, is it a language breakdown? Is it just the way that he kind of interprets it? Does a few Turkish or certain Turkish players joining the side, like, does that look like a brand new 11 in his head, or does that look like one or two people coming over? And I think that, we've seen partnerships like that when the Allams came and brought bought the Egyptians with them.
I was going to make that comparison, when Fatty and Ghetto came in as well. Yeah.
Get Ghetto on the phone. I think that, the City fans remember that time in such a positive way. And I think that, if it's that's the type of partnership he's talking about, well, like, bring it on. I think that that's certainly something that would work for all parties. And it sounds to me, and I think from reading between the lines with your comments, that's kind of where your speculation kind of aligns with that more so than a complete overhaul.
Yeah, that's right. I don't see it as being tear up the academy, tear up the first 11 and just bring in a whole bunch of Turkish players to sort of, make this production line of Turkish players coming through playing in England, which some people I think have sort of seen it as. I definitely, and you look, and maybe some are also seeing it as a bit like the Wolves model, where they brought in a lot of Portuguese players. And even then, they do still have, your kind of Cody. At the time when they were promoted, they also had Doherty coming through as well, and they were players that had been there for a long time as well. So I don't think you're going to see an overhaul in that sense. And you have to remember as well, if he's buying the club and pumping a lot of money in, he's not going to want to put the club's position in the league in jeopardy, where he might see it tumbling down the divisions. He'd want to be progressing it with a calculated sort of decision-making process to get it promoted. So he wouldn't be overhauling the squad that drastically.
Yeah, and the second thing that I think is absolutely has to be considered here is, I mean, look at where we sit in the league at the moment. Like, we're obviously towards the tail end of the championship, and you think if you reflect on City in the last couple of years, particularly, it's been one of cost-cutting measures, and we've seen huge player turnover. Our budget has changed to that very much of a shoestring budget. And I don't know if there's as much connection between certainly the entire playing group and the fans. I think there's a few players that absolutely resonate with, but it's a very different time period to when, there was the players that we were watching under Steve Bruce, where, they had the Irish boys, they had, I know that certainly we've talked at length before about the amount of actually born and bred Hull players there are in this squad. And I know that that's a very endearing thing to the fans, but across the board, changing a few players, they're not those, it's not like Hernandez is on the move or something like we would have seen in the future, or Paul McShane, where the fans really got their nose out of joint. I think if there was a case for KLP to be sold, I think people would get their nose out of joint at the moment. But for the vast majority, a lot of these players have only been at the club a very short time, and I think that with that in mind, we are in a position where we can make some pretty significant changes and it not upset the apple cart entirely. So look, I think it's promising. Until the deal gets signed, I'm not going to speculate because I'm just so fed up with getting my hopes up. But first and foremost, I would just love to see the fans back. I want to watch the games at the KCOM again with a full house and just the vibrance about Hull City again.
Yeah, it is a sad point that I think I saw there's about 4,000 tickets sold for Sheffield United supporters for the weekend. And unfortunately, I have a bad feeling that there might actually end up being more Sheffield United supporters in the stadium than home fans, which would be, I guess, sort of just a summary or a the definition of what the issues are at the moment with the alums and the supporters and the troubles that we're having with the crowds at the moment. So I hope that's not the case. I hope we see a big City crowd there. This is essentially our only, well, our probably our main derby game for the season. I know we've got Huddersfield as well as another Yorkshire team, but Sheffield Wednesday, Leeds out of the division at the moment. There aren't a whole lot of other Yorkshire derbies to look forward to.
And equally, Alex, let's remember that if you do go and buy this club, you don't really need to be that good of an owner to endear yourself to the fans.
Yeah.
Like, the standard's low. So buying the club and coming in as the new owner, so long as you don't do anything too, outrageous, like you're going to be loved and revered by the fans instantly.
I reckon all you'd have to do is come into the club, have, a half price ticket game for his first game at the club, bring in one or two flashy, one or two decent signings in January to get people a bit excited. And I reckon that's a pretty easy way to start off with a pretty positive reputation.
Yeah, could not agree more.
All right, well, let's move on then, and we'll do our favorite game, triple flashback feature. We'll get you to try and guess the three answers for this question. Now, this one I'm hoping might be a bit more of an easy question than the last one I gave you, but we'll see how you go. So this week's question is, can you name our last three wins at Wembley Stadium?
Yeah, I think so. I think the easiest, I mean, when you play at Wembley, it's obviously a very special occasion. So that's probably what, sets it apart from some of the other, in-season or previous season questions that we've had. But certainly, I'd have to remember the promotion game when Diami scored the worldly against Sheff Wednesday, the Owls. That's definitely one of them, and that's in more recent times. There will also be the Cup semi-final where we upset the Blades. Upset the Blades, where we came back to win that game in very honourable fashion. And then I think if you were to go back more, it'd have to be Bristol. It'd have to be Dino's worldly goal and probably the most famous goal in City history. And I would say that's the top three.
Bingo. Yeah, it's. I think I could be wrong. I believe that will be. It's our only three wins at Wembley. So it was a question that was a bit easy in that sense, I guess. But it was a question that I couldn't pass up posing this week, considering our opposition this week was Sheffield United. But look, we've broken a few hearts in Sheffield at Wembley Stadium, and look, if you want to even consider with the Arsenal game, we're actually we're undefeated at Wembley in regulation time, which is a nice little stat to have.
Well, and I guess let's throw another one into the mix. If outside of probably the big 5 or 6 clubs in England, would there be a team in England or in English football at the moment that has a better record at Wembley? Because
Yeah, I think it'd be hard to argue.
We've played there a lot in recent times for a club of our stature, and often coming away with very positive memories.
Yeah, I think after that Sheff Wednesday game, people were sort of suggesting that Wembley were essentially our second home, considering in that stretch of 2-3 years we had the FA Cup final, the FA Cup semi-final, and that playoff final with, in regulation time at least, no defeats, and a pretty strong performance against Arsenal as well. So pretty good memories from that ground in general.
And let's not forget, under Mark Phelan, we almost qualified for what would have been the final of the Carling Cup then. It could have been another Wembley appearance. So you don't count City out when they go to their second ground, I guess.
Yeah, and I guess the remarkable thing about that Sheffield United game and Sheffield Wednesday game as well, Huddleston, sort of one of the big players in those games is back at the club, which is nice to have a much more tangible connection to those games now. It doesn't feel quite so long ago when you've still got one of those heroes running around in the 11.
That's right. Yeah,
that's right. Well, talking about Sheffield United, we'll look ahead now to that Sheffield United fixture this weekend. We are the early game. It's really unfortunate at the moment with Sydney's lockdowns. We had penciled this game in for a cheers visit. 9:30 p.m. kickoff would have been fantastic, but we will be watching along from home. KO Sports or BN Sports for those Aussies watching along or listening along is where you'll find this game. It won't be on iFollow. So we are coming up against Lavisa Jokanovic's team, formerly manager of Watford and Fulham, with promotions with those sides. It's been a tough start to the season for Sheffield United. They sort of similar to our troubles, had quite a long barren spell of not even managing to score a goal to start the season, but really sort of cured that itch quite significantly with that 6-2 win over Peterborough. So sort of as you were suggesting with us, it could be that the goals all come in a rush, and then followed that up with a 2-2 draw with Preston. But look, they're a really damaging, strong side. I mean, everyone knows their struggles in the Premier League last season, but at championship level, their squad's as good as any, really, once they get going. So a really tough opponent this weekend.
Yeah, absolutely. And like as you mentioned, with their form guide, they really have, since that victory, turned things around. And it's not a very nice time to be playing them. And as you mentioned, dropping down from the Premier League, their squad on paper is as you said, as good as any. And I think that we're given the fact where we're sitting at the moment in the last couple of games, confidence is pretty low. I love that 9:30 time slot. I mean, this is gold feeling for us Aussies over here. So I'm still remaining optimistic, and I'm going to be really excited to watch this game. But a very tough challenge ahead this week.
Certainly. I guess looking at that side that started against Blackburn, well, obviously with the knowledge that Honeyman's now fit as well, who would you bring in? Like, I mean, I guess from my point of view, I'm looking at it and thinking probably Tyler Smith in for Magennis up top, and then potentially Honeyman and Moncur in for Smallwood and Matt Smith, or would you probably keep Matt Smith in the side over Moncur?
Well, the argument as well is I'm not certain that I'd be starting Wilkes as well, given the way he's performed. I think he looks a little bit off the pace at the moment, and I mean, I think everybody is excited to see what Honeyman can do. I think that with George Honeyman is probably the most spoken about City player, because we've had a love-hate relationship with him over the years, or I certainly have, and I was so buoyed by what I saw from him in League One last season. And I think that him coming back with just the amount of running that he has in his legs, and just the kind of the heartbeat that he brings to the team, I'm really excited to see what he's able to do. So I would be rushing Honeyman back into the starting 11, and that would be the very first change. And then, yeah, I would probably be looking to bench Wilkes and maybe start Moncur. I think Magennis is definitely starting to kind of run out of time, in the sense that, as you mentioned, he has the offside problem, and Tyler Smith's looking exceptional at the moment. And I mean, we still haven't seen enough from Longman. There's options now. There's a lot of ways that McCann could choose to play this game, and I wouldn't be too surprised to see a fresher looking City squad with some significant changes.
The concept to me of starting Tyler Smith up top reminds me a little bit of back when we used to play Sunderland under Steve Bruce, and he would basically try and find a way to fit all of the ex-Sunderland players into the side. I suppose using the logic that those players would perhaps have a point to prove against their former club. And certainly in this case, I could see Tyler Smith having a point to prove after Sheffield United let him leave to join us. So he's certainly one I'd be looking to start up top. And you mentioned there Moncur starting instead of Wilkes, which is something that I'd actually sort of toyed around with a little bit, because I know when Moncur first joined us, it was sort of suggested that whilst he could play in that sort of central midfield role, he could also have a flexible role across that front three. So I wouldn't mind seeing Moncur come in for Wilkes up top to kind of sort of unlock his creativity a little bit more and sort of release him from any sort of defensive duties. And then, I guess you'd have Matt Smith, Doherty, and Honeyman in that midfield three, which I think is quite potent as well.
Yeah, and depending on how their game goes as well, like how McCann chooses to set up, like starting KLP may not be the best option either. If you wanted to, if you kind of set up to go more defensively and then, hopefully come at them late, like Ken Lewis Potter's not someone that you would kind of want to put in that starting position, knowing that there's going to be a huge defensive role for him. Why not, keep his legs fresh and then get him to kind of come on with half an hour to go or something like that. Tactically, I think McCann needs to try something different here, because there hasn't been, I mean, as you mentioned, the record of not scoring has gone on for far too long. And I think that if you're going to try and unlock a team like Sheffield United, who have, absolute class and in certain areas, you need to throw something at them that's a little bit different to what we've been seeing the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, I guess looking at the fixtures ahead after that Sheffield United game, we do travel to Stoke next weekend. But then after that, it's a really nice run of 6 games against Blackpool, Middlesbrough, Huddersfield, Peterborough, Luton, and Coventry. So whilst we sort of talked earlier about the struggles that we've had and the tough fixtures that we've got here with Sheffield United and then Stoke to come the following week, it really opens up after that. So as much as we're sort of struggling to score and struggling to get results at the moment, I do think it's important that the squad and the supporters keep a level head, at least for the next 5 weeks, and see how we land after that. But I guess for this game in particular, how are you feeling going into it? Where do you see the score finishing up?
Yeah, look, my head says that I think Sheff are probably going to be too good for us. I really do fear this fixture, but given the fact that Honeyman's back into the side, is giving me a little bit more hope. And I think that, with any team at this level, there's only so long you can kind of go without a performance. And I think that we're kind of due. So look, score predictions is a really tough one here. I wouldn't be surprised to see maybe a 1-1 draw. That I would kind of accept that, but it's probably more likely to maybe see a 2-0 Sheffield United victory, sadly. It's much to say it.
I was thinking 1-1 as well. I think it's the game that will finally break through and get a result, or get a goal, I should say. But can't see us keeping them out as well. So maybe a 1-1 draw would be sort of what we can hope for. But look, as you say, TV cameras, early game, early kickoff, lots to prove. We're sort of due a good performance, as you said. We started to look a little bit better against Blackburn. Honeyman back in the side. I think there's a lot of signs to point to for a bit of an optimistic view of this game. Sheffield United, they got the 6-2 against Peterborough, but they did then draw against Preston, who of course we beat. So there are sort of arguments to be made that there's the potential for a decent result in this one. So look, I'll probably optimistically go for a 1-1 draw in this one. But that being said, thank you for joining me, Logan.
My pleasure, Alex. It was therapeutic to talk about the last 2 weeks and try and unpack some of the challenges that we're currently facing.
Yeah, no worries. It's interesting. Yeah, look, I wouldn't have thought we had as much to talk about as we did from a 0-0 and 2-0 performance, but we had plenty to talk about, I think. So it was a good episode. So Yeah, look, thank you for joining me. And we've got plenty to look forward to tomorrow night against Sheffield United at the nice and early time slot of 9:30. So hopefully a big city audience over here in Australia for that one as well. So look, thank you everyone for listening for this episode of the Tigers Down Under, and we will catch you next time. But until then, come on, City.